Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 14, Episode 152. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us here this Tuesday, Steelers Nation. Episode coming out a little bit later today than usual. We'll explain why here shortly. But Dave, hopefully you had a good weekend and hopefully your week's starting off pretty well.
Yeah, no major problems to report here. So that's always a good thing. Obviously, getting into this, what are we, second week of July now? We got a couple weeks to go until training camp gets underway. I think officially this morning we have 61 days until the Steelers' first game against the Atlanta Falcons, and I think we are less than a month away now at this point from the Steelers' first preseason game. So hopefully that time flies by, and we actually have a little bit of news to talk about this morning.
We do. Some news dropping on Monday related to Cam Sutton and his suspension. Before we do that, I want to mention the reason why this episode is coming out a bit later today, a little bit later from the time Dave and I are recording this portion of the podcast. We'll be talking for the second time. Very grateful and happy to talk with Coach Dick LeBeau, coming out with a new book dropping today called Legendary, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers Defense, the Zone Blitz, and My 6 Decades in the NFL. Our own Scott Brown helping to create and formulate the book. And so we'll talk with Coach LeBeau just a little bit later on the show, get his thoughts on the book and the reason for it, the stories, and some of his own just life and time in the NFL. But Dave, we will begin with Cam Sutton. Monday afternoon, the news coming out from the NFL is an 8-game suspension for the 2024 season, meaning, of course, Cam Sutton cannot play the first 8 regular season games of the Steelers' 2024 year. He is eligible to return on Week 9. His first game will be Week 10 because Pittsburgh has a Week 9 bye. Will be Week 10 against the Washington Commanders. So I think we all strongly suspected the suspension was going to come. We didn't know the length of it, probably a little on the heavier end than what most people expected. Sutton also will not appeal, which is interesting to notice, as I'm sure you'll mention. So this will stand and stick at 8 games. And so Pittsburgh will have to find some other slot corner options until at least Week 10.
Yeah, I think if we roll back to the way we speculated after they signed him initially, I think I kind of was thinking somewhere between, 3 and 6 games or something, and maybe, less than 6 if he were to appeal such a thing. Overall, can I say that I'm shocked by the length of time? I'll just say that it was longer. The suspension was a little bit longer than what I anticipated. On the flip side, my mouth did not drop to the floor, and I did not do laps around the house in anger once it was reported that it was 8 weeks. I think, and I mentioned this on our live stream for those that did or didn't catch it on Monday night. I find it a little bit surprising that he's chosen not to appeal it, and I do wonder what is behind that decision and where that motivation came from. Is this his side, his agency, his representation just saying, hey, just, take this for what it is and let's be done with it. Let's start trying to rebuild things, image and all like that? Or did the Steelers, maybe go to Cam Sutton and his side and say, look, we don't, we want this to get behind us as soon as possible. Maybe both sides thinking was, let's get this put behind us as soon as possible and not go through the dirt again of it hitting the media and, he's suspending it and then it coming out after the fact that after suspension or after appeal, the Cam Sutton suspension was not lowered. Maybe the league pretty much told him, look, you can try to appeal this, but it's probably not go. I would think that would be the way that it works. But normally the way that you see these things, regardless of what the punishment is for the league, even if it's just fine for an illegal play in a game, usually the status quo with all of that is an automatic appeal from the players. I think even the NFLPA kind of advises, hey, go. What do you have to lose by appealing this? So I guess my main takeaway coming out of the Monday news on Cam Sutton is what is the motivation behind him not appealing, and whose idea was that? And I'll tell you this, I mean, it is what it is up until this point, and obviously we're probably not going to hear from Cam Sutton until he gets to training camp. I think if I was a journalist, that would be my first question to him the next time that he meets the media is, what went into the decision not to appeal this? But that's where we stand right now. It seems like this is pretty cut and dry at this point. It's going to be an 8-game suspension. He'll lose 8 weeks of pay. And, as you stated there, they'll have the bye week in week 9. And you can kind of go over what the time frame with him, and return to practice and all will be ahead of that. But this is pretty cut and dry, I think, at this point.
It is. And as for why he did not appeal, you're right. It's hard to know for sure. My guess is what you said off the top is he just wants to let this story go away as much as it can. Of course, it'll get talked about at camp when he does return, but rather than relitigate this process in an appeal fashion, just to accept it and, move on. And that's probably what he's been trying to do this whole time since everything transpired back in March. So, the timeline, my understanding is based on, because the NFL has updated and modified some of those suspension policy in recent years, but that Sutton will be able to practice in training camp, play in the preseason. How much Pittsburgh uses him is, of course, to their discretion, but he will be eligible. He will be with the team in Latrobe, I would assume. The first half of the suspension, so the first 4 weeks, he cannot be with the team. It basically, once the 53-man roster is set at final cutdowns, he's got to be away from the team, away from the facility fully for the first 4 weeks, weeks 1 through 4. And then week 5, he's allowed to return to be with the team around the facility, to be in the weight room, to be in the cafeteria, those types of things. And then I believe it's 2 weeks before the suspension is up, he's allowed to practice. I don't know if it's exactly going to be for week 7 or week 6 or the exact timeline on that, but there will be a practice window that should open up for him before he's eligible for full reinstatement post week 8, which still has to be granted by the NFL, but you would assume it will be, provided he does all the right things along the way. And then, of course, as we mentioned, can play in week 10 against Washington after Pittsburgh's week 9 bye. So that's going to be the timeline on how things will look like for Sutton the next couple of months.
And look, the Steelers signed him knowing very well that a suspension was likely to be a suspension of some length was likely to be the outcome here. They signed him for the minimum at $1.21 million. For those worried about the money aspect of it, he's not getting paid for the 8 games that he's suspended for. So as far as that goes, it's not a cash expenditure for those 8 games for the Steelers, and more. And additionally, you should see it start coming off week by week on the NFLPA salary cap page there, of them getting credited back those game checks against the cap. I don't think they will be credited before the season. I think the way those work is usually week by week as he misses a game due to suspension, that amount is credited back to the Steelers as far as the salary cap space goes. But not a lot invested in him overall. It's not like he's going to take up a roster spot at the start of the season. In fact, I don't think he has to even be carried on the 53-man roster before going to the suspended list. I think that just has to happen automatically. Now, obviously, come time that he is reinstated by the league, he would have to go from the reserve suspended list to the active 53-man roster. So at that point, assuming whenever that takes place, you would obviously have to create a roster spot for him at that time. But I see a lot of people saying, well, what a waste of money. They shouldn't even, why did they even sign him in the first place? Look, you can look at it at this point. You get a half a season player at this point. And best case scenario is that things go smashingly well for however you have decided to handle the slot situation, whether it be by one player, two players, a committee of players, and you really are comfortable with how you're handling that by the time Cameron Sutton comes back. And at that point, you kind of, who knows, maybe even Cameron Sutton is an inactive player moving forward because of things are going so smashingly well. Or on the flip side, things aren't going well, or maybe you want to add to the kind of committee of how you're going to handle that situation there, and then you put him back on the 53-man roster. And look, we all know how seasons go. You could have an injury the week ahead of that the timing ends up perfect on the return of a player such as Cam Sutton. So it'll be one of those things that they'll deal with when the time comes. And even in the bye week, well, I would imagine that once the suspension comes up, they have to decide what has to happen to him. So I would imagine that would happen during the bye week, would it not? In other words, you can't leave him floating in limbo even during the bye week, because the suspension officially ends, I think, after week 8.
Unless you're granted a roster exemption, but
Sure.
I don't know if that's typical for true suspended players in Sutton's situation. Maybe, but I'd have to check some of those things. I'm a little uncertain there.
That's a good point about that, because but then again, if he had been practicing, and I don't know, it'll be interesting to see if they ask for and are granted a roster spot extension there. But that's something that we have 8 weeks into the season to have to worry about there. But it is something to think about nonetheless.
Sure. The question is, how does Pittsburgh bridge that gap through at least the first 8 games? So Sutton off the table until at least week 10. That leaves you with a current, we'll call it a group of 4 of players currently on the roster who have been mentioned in that slot role. There's 2 youngsters and 2 more veteran type of players. The youngsters, of course, undrafted rookie free agent Beanie Bishop from West Virginia, the best and most prized free agent the Pittsburgh brought in post-draft this year. Also Thomas Graham Jr., who's played in the league for a couple of years, but not a ton of snaps overall. Then the veterans, there's Graylin Arnold, who kind of gets forgotten. He was signed right around the same time as Cam Sutton. He's got the most experience of anybody who played last season. He was with the Houston Texans. And then also Josiah Scott, who was the Eagles slot corner primarily 2 years ago in 2022, who could be fighting for a role, spent part of last year on Pittsburgh's practice squad. So as things stand right now, and others could be brought in, we'll talk about that, but that's the group of 4. How does this all shake out, Dave?
What you're trying to say is that's it. That's the list, huh?
That's the list.
Look, not that we needed any more of a reason to pay close attention to Beanie Bishop during training camp and the preseason, but this really puts a exclamation point on that. Really looking forward to watching to see what he can do. This is another thing I mentioned on the YouTube live stream Monday night there. Even if Beanie Bishop comes out and has just a smashingly great training camp preseason, you do have to wonder how much they're going to be willing to put on him, because look, you can have a lot of different packages even when it comes to sub package type situations. You could have potentially maybe a down distance personnel type situation there. Need we remind everybody how long it took for Joey Porter Jr. to even get on the field on a regular basis last season, and how he was more package dictated there. In my head, at least, with several weeks to go before training camp gets underway, I almost kind of wonder if this won't be or will be a some sort of a committee approach that, okay, Beanie, you're going to handle, this type situation. Obviously we're probably going to see some dime type situation as part of this regardless. I don't think it's just going to probably be one player that you're rolling out there for 40 nickel snaps when it comes to the slot there. So it would be nice to have a guy or two during training camp and the preseason that you really get excited about, such as a Beanie Bishop or Graylin Arnold or something like that. But I've got a sneaky feeling that come week one, and barring somebody from the outside being brought in that's not on the roster right now, this feels like it might end up being piecemealed together.
I'm with you. And that's how it's been post Mike Hilton, whether it was Cam Sutton and Arthur Millette. They really had a rundown guy and a pass down guy. That was Millette, the rundown guy. Sutton would bump inside from the outside corner spot in 22 and play nickel in passing situations. Last year, it was Chandon Sullivan, the rundown guy. It was Patrick Peterson, the pass down guy when Porter would come on the field until Peterson had to make that switch to safety, and Sullivan became the full-time guy. So I don't see any one player. We'll have to watch him, and maybe somebody will surprise, and great if they do. But I don't see any one player currently on this roster so talented that's going to warrant all down, all situation type of consideration that, Mike Hilton was able to do for this team. So, yeah, I think ultimately, until Sutton returns, it's going to be at least two players handling these roles. Maybe it's Bishop on early downs and Scott on pass downs or some combination thereof. That's likely how Pittsburgh will do it because it's the way they've been doing it.
Yeah, I would agree there. But I mean, look, it'll be a good problem to have if you have one of those guys like Beanie Bishop that ends up being your kind of next Mike Hilton. How much did Mike Hilton play in that first season when he caught on?
I'd have to check. I mean, he started in Jacksonville and was in New England, and he was on Pittsburgh's practice squad his first year, I think, for
sure.
He didn't really play until his second season in the NFL. That first full camp, it was him and I think William Gay splitting time. I believe early in the season there was a bit of a split, and then Hilton's role, if memory serves, it increased throughout the year. But he was kind of in his sophomore season despite very limited playing time, as opposed to Bishop, who's going to be a true rookie.
Sure. But I mean, within that, though, I'm trying to think back at the looking back at 2017 for Mike Hilton out of the chute. He played 34 defensive snaps in week one of 2017. In week two, he played 54 snaps. I mean, he logged well over 500 snaps that season for the Steelers on defense alone.
Sure. I mean, he had a great camp. I mean, he had spring buzz. I remember Ramon Foster talking about this. Is Mike Hilton wearing like number 40, some weird, awkward number for a corner that's falling out, and that carried over. So it's not impossible, and there's certainly a need. If Bishop can be amazing, then great. Maybe they'll give him more, but it does seem unlikely because, as you said, with Porter, they were very careful to approach Porter the first month before giving him increased reps. It's doubtful they're going to give the full plate to Bishop to start week one.
Man, that's probably been 7 years ago.
Yeah, man. Wild.
That is wild. But I mean, I guess best case scenario is you get somebody like that, maybe a Graylin Arnold, somebody that just balls out that you feel really comfortable with, that you don't have, because the more players that you have coming on and off the field, and the more situations you set yourself up for, communication issues or just substitution issues and all like that. But I mean, if you're a betting person right now at this time, like I said, it's probably going to end up being, at least first couple weeks of the season, some sort of committee type thing.
The question is, does Pittsburgh bring in anybody else? And could they reunite with another former Steelers cornerback? Could they bring back a Chandon Sullivan or a Patrick Peterson, both men free agents? Peterson very much talked about his desire to return to Pittsburgh. Is that on the table?
Oh yeah. I mean, I absolutely. And we've, harken back to, my annual write-up of players not in with the team come the time mandatory minicamp ends that they end up signing with the Steelers and then ultimately on the 53-man roster. What does of those two that you just mentioned, and really, Chandon Sullivan's got it. Is he really unemployed still?
Yes, still a free agent.
Yeah. There's obviously a reason for that, but was he that awful last year? And I realize that's not a way to look at it, instead of questioning how good was he, how awful he was. But he did have some nice moments on the field that and I think overall gave you a little bit of confidence. At least he knows what he's doing. I guess where I'm getting at is if you had to choose between a guy like Patrick Peterson and Chandon Sullivan, I feel like I would lean more towards a guy like Sullivan.
I'd take Peterson. Sullivan did well in the rundown role, and he played well down the stretch when he was forced into basically full-time action because Peterson had to shift to safety. But he's really a zone hook kind of guy that can't turn and run and man up in coverage like that. So, I mean, if you needed a rundown guy, then yeah, I think you'd look towards Sullivan over Peterson, but just the overall pound for pound best player and talent, I'm still going to give the edge to Peterson. But
Peterson in a pinch could obviously play outside for you and yada yada, so you get a little bit more versatility. And then also you could do some of the probably some of the deeper half stuff with him. God, you're not going to do that a lot, but
I mean, in dime they do that quite a bit, and losing that with Sutton could actually be huge because the whole thing was to kind of free up Minka and allow him to roam around and rob crossers, and that may be more difficult if you have a Beanie Bishop in there. Probably not going to try to do a lot of complicated safety rotation type stuff there. Maybe more so with a veteran, with Josiah Scott or Arnold, but even then, you probably had more confidence in Sutton doing that. So that's actually an underrated aspect of losing Sutton for this length of time.
Okay, I can buy that. The question is, look, is it plausible that somebody not on the roster ends up on the roster because of this suspension? I think the short answer to that is yes. The question is when, if at all, would something like that happen? I would tend to think that they would at least want to get into camp a couple of weeks to see what some of these guys on the roster can do that they already have, to see if they can maybe piecemeal something together and then maybe get closer to the, halfway through this thing and say, this isn't working. We need to get somebody with more experience. Let's get Patrick Peterson back in here. But on the flip side too, Patrick Peterson's made a lot of money in this league to this point. How much are you willing to spend on a guy like Patrick Peterson, and would he be willing to accept, a veteran benefit contract?
I don't know on the particulars of what he's willing to accept, but he wants a job. His phone has not been ringing off the hook, and he's expressly wanted to come back to Pittsburgh. So I think he wants to just get a chance, and he's going to have to take whatever he can get, basically, which won't be much. Yeah, I agree, though. I mean, they certainly could make a move mid-camp around cut-down date. That's possible, but I think they'll at least not make a move before training camp, not add anybody from the outside, and take the current group, evaluate them for at least 2 weeks, maybe the first preseason game, and go from there. If you got to sign Peterson mid-August, he's staying in shape, he said. He knows the defense, of course, a smart veteran guy, not worried about really his ramp-up period too much. And so I think that's going to be the way they approach this thing for the first couple weeks of August. Yeah,
and you can obviously scout guys around the NFL as well, too, during the preseason. And I imagine they will, to see if there's maybe a guy that's, a fringe type guy that maybe has some experience that maybe they could get after the fact.
Sure. Sheldon White, the director of pro scouting, and that staff will be busy this preseason, as they always are, but especially with an eye on slot corner for them. And we'll be watching it as well, because they brought in Desmond King last year, which did not work out, obviously, but they made a move in a similar fashion last year. They could try to do something again this year if there is a name that becomes available. I was thinking about this, Dave. I was going to write about it a couple weeks ago, but I was like, it's an old spilt milk conversation. Was even the simple act of signing Cam Sutton the right move? Should they have signed Patrick Peterson instead? You would have gotten Peterson for maybe just a little bit more money for the entire season, as opposed to Sutton for half the season.
Yeah, but do we know for sure that Patrick Peterson's not out there at least waiting to see if he can get more money elsewhere?
I mean, he's almost been begging Pittsburgh to sign him on his podcast. I think if they had offered a contract, he likely would have taken it.
I mean, even at the veteran minimum, or are you talking
maybe just above, just a little bit above a $2 million contract?
Well, I mean, we're assuming a lot there, but and maybe we don't know that they haven't offered him something.
He has, I mean, maybe he has not indicated any. He's only said he's talked to Dallas. He talked to Dallas a couple weeks ago. That's the only commentary he's at least offered about what his free agent experience has been like so far this year.
Okay. And look, here's the only thing that's changed in these last several weeks is the fact that now we have a definitive of what the suspension is for Cam Sutton. Everybody had to think in their head that that Cam Sutton was going to receive some sort of suspension, right? Whether it be,
sure,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, games. You knew that this was something that you're going to have to deal with at the start of the season at a minimum, right?
Of course, yeah. And we know that the NFL's default domestic violence policy is 6 games, and they can add and subtract there based on mitigating or aggravating factors. Obviously, they found aggravating factors here, which added 2 games to that default policy. So, yeah, there's no question anybody who thought Sutton was going to get off scot-free or just get 1 game, that was never realistic.
Right. So, I mean, this is obviously this position is something that needs monitoring as we get into the start of training camp. I would be a bit surprised if they addressed it between now and the start of training camp. I tend to think they will take a look at the guys they have on the roster right now who have been with the team when was Graylin Arnold even signed?
Right around Cam Sutton, just
okay.
month or so ago, month and a half ago.
So he, obviously you have a lot probably to learn about him in your system at this point. I mean, it could go 8 different directions here. Why
do you think Pittsburgh has struggled so much? And I understand you can't get...
let me go back and answer your question. Do I think that had Patrick Peterson been willing to sign for $2.5 million, that they should have gotten that done already? Probably. Do I think it was a mistake to sign Cameron Sutton? No, not at the price. And because they even had to understand, because they said that they did their due diligence on their side for whatever that looked like. And I imagine they did. And they signed him with the understanding that he was probably going to miss at least X amount of games. So, and they get that credited back. So, other than it being quote unquote, a distraction of some sort, if you want to call it that, and obviously we talked about this, Cam Sutton probably could have chose his words a lot better during that interview during mandatory minicamp there. The fact that, they got that out of the way early, and obviously he will be probably addressing the media once he gets to training camp at least once, and then, say what he has to say, and then probably not talk to the media again after that. I don't view it as a detrimental signing of him. But
who would have been the better signing? I mean, yeah, it's not detrimental to sign Sutton, but was he the best signing available?
I mean, look, you could have probably done both of them if you want to be realistic about it.
Sure, you could have.
So
anyway.
But we don't know what's out there, what's offered. If Patrick Peterson said, "Look, I'll keep that on the back burner. Let me see how the rest of this plays out." I mean, there's a lot of variables that we don't know.
Mm-hmm. Of course, yeah, I can't speak to everything. I'm just interpreting based off of what Peterson has said on his podcast and kind of the way he's hinted how things have gone for him overall. But regardless, the question I was going to ask is, why has Pittsburgh struggled so much to find that Mike Hilton replacement? I know that it's not as easy to wave a magic wand and just find a starting slot corner and call it a day. But they knew the value of what Hilton brought, of having that steady Eddie, that every down kind of guy. And since then, it's not like they've really even invested heavily in that position. They've not drafted highly. They've not really signed anybody. It's been piecemeal together. They've had every camp, not just this one. They've had messiness at slot corner, whether it was last year with Duke Dawson getting reps and who's the slot corner and Peterson playing inside for the first time a couple of years ago. They tried Minka Fitzpatrick in the slot to start the year. That was a disaster. They tried Antoine Brooks in camp. We always had these discussions about it's a slot corner, and wasn't this the squirreling those nuts comments from Tomlin a few years back too? That was in reference to the slot corner situation. It has just been a mess post Mike Hilton, and I can't quite understand why this team has had such a difficulty in finding a replacement, a full-time guy.
And let's be honest about this. Going back to 2017, there, Mike Hilton was mud on the wall. It wasn't like you went into that thinking, "Oh yeah, Mike Hilton's going to be the guy." You know,
yeah, it's supposed to be Senquez Golson. It's the other Ole Miss,
right. So, yeah, especially in today's NFL where nickel's the new base, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's used 2/3 of the time. I mean, people have to understand base is still used more than they think, but nickel and sub packages are your primary personnel groupings.
Right. And you would think that within all these years, they would have at least the quality of the mud maybe would have been increased.
I mean, they looked at some of the top slot corners in this year's draft, whether it was Sanderstill or Phillips or Max Melton. And I understand the draft path they took, and I'm good with it overall. But they've just, at some point, similar to the D-line conversation of you got to have some heavier investments in that position, in that grouping. They have to make a run at somebody they believe can be a true every down slot corner, at least give themselves that chance. Because so far it has been, as you said, a lot of mud on the wall.
And even looking at the total defense right now in its totality as it stands right now, I know there should be talk about depth on the defensive line. And we had a listener last night, kind of get our thoughts on, are there concerns as far as depth on a defensive line? And the answer is yes to that. But I think if you look at those starting three, along with the starting five across the front there with Highsmith and TJ Watt, you got to, assuming those guys stay healthy, can play the amount of snaps that you want them to play, you feel pretty good about that front five overall. Where I'm going with this is obviously what is the quote unquote weakest spot, or what even has been the weakest spot, knowing that Cameron Sutton was going to miss X amount of games at the start of the season. This has been a glaring weakness of the defense dating back to the end of the season, right?
Sure. Once they released Patrick Peterson and didn't re-sign Sullivan, their slot corners last year, that spot became wide open. They really didn't do much in the offseason to address it. They signed Beanie Bishop post-draft, and they've been cobbling together a couple of veteran guys in Arnold and Sutton since. So we'll see how things play out. I mean, I'm still overall excited about this Steelers defense. It should still be a good to really great type of defense with all the talent they have top to bottom, but it's been this slot corner position a real sore spot for them trying to find somebody.
Right. And look, I mean, even moving past this year, I mean, let's say Dante Jackson works out smashingly opposite, Joey Porter. He's not under contract next year, so are you going to have to hope that one of either those young kids step up and Trice or Rush or along those lines there, or you're probably going to have to invest capital in an outside spot, and then you might not even be able to address the slot spot again next year, where
Sure.
In the upper portions of the draft,
along with whatever other needs you have. D-line probably going to be something you want to address early and heavily next year. So yeah, those are all fair questions. Did you just watch Austin Powers or something? I got a lot of smashingly, got a lot of British slang going on from you today.
What did I use?
Smashingly. I've heard that.
Oh, I don't know. I probably pick up some lexicon from subconsciously and use it until
I like it.
I don't know why. I don't know why.
I like it.
Yeah, baby.
All right, I like that less. All right, Dave. Any other final thoughts?
I have never watched any of those movies all the way through.
I've even watched Austin Powers.
I know a lot of lines from it, obviously from clips and all like that, but I've never watched any of those movies all the way through.
I'm going to pull the Dave Bryant card. Watch that. Put that on your list for this weekend, Dave.
Yeah, baby.
All right. Maybe not. Any other final thoughts here on the Cam Sutton news and the fallout that comes from it?
No, just that, look, I'm going to be needling you, and not that you won't be volunteering the information anyway in your training camp reports, but that'll be, that remains a position that we're going to pay a lot of close attention to throughout the rest of the summer here.
And because last year they were in a similar situation of uncertainty, although maybe even a stronger situation compared to this year, be careful. Don't read too much into who the day one starting slot corner in training camp is, because last year that was Duke Dawson. We went, oh my goodness, Duke Dawson, is he really in play here? And Tomlin warned they're going to rotate, calm down. And unfortunately, Dawson got hurt mid-camp, but was unlikely to ever win a spot anyway. They rotated every single day, basically a different slot corner. Between him, Sullivan, and Peterson, I think it was. So be careful. Probably get a veteran to get the first look, maybe Scott, but it's not going to really matter who's taking the first slot reps when this team reports and has that first practice July 25th.
Who was the one a couple of years ago that started to open up camp, I think, in the slot, and then got injured and it was off the roster before we knew it?
Was it Antoine Brooks?
Yeah.
It was like a big week for Antoine Brooks, and then he got hurt, and that's when they tried to go to Minka in early season, and it was just ugly all the way around. And could they, have some safety, do some stuff? I mean, could Elliott come down over slot sometime? Sure, but in terms of 11 personnel facing a true number 2 slot receiver, going to want a corner with cornerback skills, and this team's going to have to find that guy.
Right.
All right, Dave, take a good time here to take a pause. And as we mentioned, top of the show, super excited about this for a second time. We will talk with Pittsburgh Steelers Hall of Famer Coach Dick LeBeau. The new book out today, Legendary, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers Defense, the Zone Blitz, and My 6 Decades in the NFL. Let's take a pause and come back with Coach LeBeau. And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. And as we mentioned, top of the show, a very special guest today, second time on the podcast. The new book is out now today. Dick LeBeau, Legendary, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers Defense, the Zone Blitz, and My 6 Decades in the NFL. Hall of Famer Coach Dick LeBeau joining us today. Coach, thanks so much for being here. Congrats on the book. We are super excited about it.
Well, thanks for having me, man, and go Steelers.
Absolutely. So just off the top, Coach, writing this book, the story of that 2008 Super Bowl winning team, that elite defense, when people read this book about that squad, about you and your life, what are you hoping the reader gains and takes away when they read this story?
Well, I hope that they can discern the unique accomplishment of that 2008 defense that they did statistically. I've always been a stat nut, and I was always in search of a meaningful goal. Everybody's in a position of instruction. You want to set goals for your students, and if they attain one, then you want to set the next one. I mean, I think that's pretty standard procedure, and I've always believed that it's a process that works. And I always wanted to know, well, what is a good foundation of data that we can base? What is a good defense? What is satisfactory competitively wise? And so I've studied these particular aspects my whole career, particularly when I became a defensive coordinator, because I was the guy up in front talking to the whole defense. And I came up with 11 what I thought were real critical areas. If the defense did well in the majority of those, that they would be keeping their team in the football game every week and giving their offense a chance to score enough points to win the game. So that was the salient points of my lesson plans throughout the season, if you will. And as I went through that season in 2008, it was not uncustomary for a team at the end of the year to be, first in 4 or 5 different things out of the 11 or 12 items that I had selected. But then they may be, 12th, 14th in another category. This team, the 2008 team, they just kept coming in one in every situation defensively. And I thought, well, this is kind of unusual. I said, if they can get through this year. And a point of interest, I think, was that season, our preseason schedule, based on the win percentage of the teams that we were playing from the previous year, it was the hardest one in the league. And the fact is, it was the hardest one that had ever, hardest schedule any team had ever played up till that time. And that's still true here in 2024. No one's ever played a higher rated schedule in terms of victories, losses than what we had that year. So it wasn't like they piled these numbers up against chopped liver. They were playing against the league's best. In fact, the toughest schedule that the league has ever put out. And I'm sure they do that by draw, and that's just the way it turned out. But at any rate, I thought to myself, when compiling it to establish the goals for the next year, I thought, well, this is really unusual where these guys went. I said, someone should write a book about them. Well, I said, if nobody does, I'll probably do it. I didn't know I was going to work till I was 80 years old, so my writing opportunities were slim and few and far between. You're not writing any books and coaching in the National Football League. So when I did finally retire, I said, well, let me check these stats and see if they're still as unique as they were in 2008. And sure enough, 12 years later, they were. 13, 14 years later, it took me a couple of years to write the book. So throughout all that time, no one's really come close to them. So I'm doubting in my own mind, and particularly the way the game is played today, that anybody's going to beat these. Now, records are made to be broken, I'm sure of that, and someone may come along with better numbers. But I doubt with out of my 11 categories that I had, we led the league in 9 of them, and we're second in the other 2. And it's there's not much room for improvement there for somebody else, but somebody might do it. But that's the purpose of the book, and it was a labor of love, and it took a long time to put together. What I did, I got a replay of every game. The television copy thereof, and I went back and went through all 19 games of the season. So everything, I had a great recall of it, but not like just having been through the season again. And everything was fresh in my mind, and I could report it as I kind of wanted the people to see how it was. And there's some sidebars in there involving my experience and time in the league. Longevity was probably my strongest suit, and I could help any team that I was with because of my experience. And in this situation, I had so much fun reliving that season and listening how Ben came through in the last 4 minutes of that last game in the Super Bowl and won it for us.
Yeah, it was an incredible run, and we love stats too, like you. And I know it's a team effort, it's a defensive effort, a unit effort. But I want to focus on LaMarr Woodley because his stats in that playoff run were off the charts. 6 sacks, that's tied the most in a single season, postseason in NFL history. All 6 sacks resulted in punts or turnovers. Of course, had the key one on Kurt Warner to seal the Super Bowl win. What made LaMarr Woodley so special in that era and during that postseason run in particular? Because he just could not be blocked.
Well, probably if you just give me 2 words, I'd say James Harrison.
Fair.
Is what made LaMarr Woodley. Harrison that year won the most valuable defensive player in the National Football League. And going back through that season, it was awesome, the plays that he made game in and game out. In fact, as I was watching it, and the commentators were talking a little bit about how many sacks Harrison had in pressures and recovered fumbles and forced interceptions and things of that nature. And there was 4 games to go in the season, and I said, well, he's got the most valuable player award sewed up right now, and we're only about 3/4 of the way through the year. But between James Harrison and Lamar Woodley, we had the perfect outside situation that you want to have when you're playing a 3-4 defense with 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers. And we had the Larry Foote and James Ferrier in the middle, 2 guys that were so smart and quick and agile, and you couldn't block them, cut them off. And then you had Woodley and Harrison outside. I called them my bookends because they were just bracketing everything. You couldn't get outside of them. You couldn't knock them off the ball, so you had to go inside. And you had Casey Hampton and the 2 linebackers sitting in there, and Kiesel and Aaron Smith, the ends are going to show up somewhere. You just couldn't run the ball on us, and that freed us up to do some of our blitzing and the stuff that we did. And with our secondary, Ike Taylor and Deshae Townsend and Bryant McFadden, Clark and Palomalu at the safeties, there was no place to go to work back there on us either. So the overall strength of that team was the strength of Woodley and was the strength of Harrison. There was no place else they could go, and people were worried about Harrison, who was piling up all the sacks, and you couldn't sleep on Woodley at all. He was a great player. It was an interesting draft choice for us. He played for Michigan, and he actually played down in a 4-3 defense in college. And we could see that his pass rushing skills, but we didn't get much chance to see him drop in any type of pass coverage, which is an outside 3-4 linebacker he was going to have to do. By that stage in my career, however, coaching the 3-4, I had gotten pretty experienced in looking at a guy and seeing whether he was going to be able to make the transition from a hand in the ground to standing up and getting out in space some and adjusting. I knew that Woodley had been a pretty decent basketball player, and that always gave me encouragement when I was comparing these guys that we were going to try to switch from a down rush in to a linebacker who rushes and drops. Well, in training camp, we were playing the first or second preseason game, and in the outside linebacker in the 3-4, you got to take some pass coverage responsibility. And Lamar took the tight end down the middle of the field about 35 yards, and when the quarterback threw the ball, and Lamar, very perfect timing, relaxed, athletically reached up and batted the ball away. I turned to Coach Butler and I said, "Well, Coach, there's our answer on whether we got us an outside linebacker or not." And the thing about Lamar, and it was not only true in that particular season, he played his best statistical games in the playoff games. He was remarkable, but he was a great asset. He was still a young player then, and that whole team was. They fed off one another, and no one cared who got the sack. No one cared who got the interception. No one really cared who made the game-winning play. They just wanted to make it for the defense, and that was their strongest suit, no doubt.
Coach LeBeau, that 2008 season included that Week 10 loss to the Indianapolis Colts, and I think you addressed it a little bit in the book there. I don't want to call it really a turning point because the Steelers entered that game with a 6-2 record. We were in good shape overall, but talk about on the defensive side of the ball, maybe some lessons learned or how you use that game against the Colts moving forward, being that was a loss during that season and right in the middle of the season at that.
Yeah, it was 24-20. We lost by 4 points against one of the greatest quarterbacks that played. So it wasn't anything that I was looking to slip my wrists over. However, we were only 6-3 in those first 9 games. So we had lost 2 other games, tight games. We had lost to Philadelphia 15-6, where nobody scored any points in that game. And the Giants, with another, 2-time Super Bowl quarterback winner, we lost by a touchdown, 21-14. So the earlier part of the year, I think that we were still finding our mojo, if you will. Along with that, throughout the year, not only in those games where we lost 3 times in the first 9 games, but we have had injuries sprinkled out throughout the year that year. I think Casey Hampton missed about five or six games. And I know Shea Townsend missed, I know all of four. And then for maybe another 4 games, he could only play the slot corner. And Brian McFadden had to start and play the whole game, and he was a young player. But in each of those situations, their backups, guys that stepped in there, the team never lost a beat. Chris Hope stepped in at nose tackle and played for Casey, and we just stayed right where we were in terms of running statistics against us. Nobody could run on us. That was a situation where I think we were still solidifying as a defense, because from that game on, we actually went 9-1 in our last 10 games.
Right.
And we were beaten down in Tennessee. That was the only game that any team scored very many points on us. And there was a couple of fluke plays real late in that game that got Tennessee's points up there. The game could have been won by either team on into the fourth quarter. But I think that game also helped us from the standpoint of, you as a coach, you're always preaching, take care and be alert and credit the opponent and prepare for a battle, because in the NFL, it's what it's going to be. But having lost that game by a significant margin and by far the most points that anybody scored on us, we only gave up around 13 points a game. And we weren't used to anybody putting anything on the scoreboard like that. And it just gave me a good chance to hammer as we went into the stretch run of the season there. You got to really, really take nothing for granted. And I don't think our players, let's put it this way, I think the loss happened at a perfect time in the season for us, because we played some great teams from there on in and won every one of them.
Coach, take me to, and the book is out now, Legendary, on sale right now, to the Super Bowl. You're facing Arizona, great quarterback of their own, Kurt Warner, legendary receiver, Larry Fitzgerald, number 3 offense in the league that year. What was the game plan to try to slow down that offense? What was the plan that your staff had put together to try to win that game? Can you just kind of go into detail about that?
Well, the simple truth is, anytime you get very far into the playoffs at all, you're going to run into outstanding quarterbacks. And in Warner, they had one, he was a Super Bowl champion and was very effective in moving the football his whole career. And we knew what we were going to be facing. I, by that time, was very confident in our ability to play opposing offenses and keep the game very much in touch. The biggest strength that we had game in and game out for the whole year was no big plays. And we limited the offense's capability of picking up big yardage in any one play. And they had to go the hard way, inch by inch, if you will. And in most cases, we get them stopped before they get down there. Well, we had pretty much the lead the whole football game against Arizona and had played very well, along with James Harrison's great interception right at the half, which not only kept them off the scoreboard, but gave us 7 more. So we were really exactly where we wanted to be, but we had 2 plays in that fourth quarter that were very, very aberrant to our normal playing performance, and they were big plays. And the last one was Fitzgerald right down the middle of the field, if you remember. And we were looking at a deficit with about maybe 4 minutes to go in the game, 3 minutes and 40-some seconds, something like that. And we were relying on the offense to come through for us. Well, that was totally different from the whole script of our defense all year long. We just didn't give up those kind of plays. Fortunately, what I'm trying to say is I think the game plan was working good, but if you give up big plays, they're going to put points on the board, which is what they did. Mm-hmm. And Ben made that tremendous drive, which again, I think it makes the book very entertaining for particularly Pittsburgh fans because it ended in victory with the most. I thought that Harrison's interception for a touchdown is the best defensive play I've ever seen from the standpoint of individual and collective. We rallied 9 out of the 11 guys, and one of them had the ball in his arm, Harrison, and Deshae was covering a deep out down in the far corner of the end zone. He's the only one that didn't get back into that return. The other 9 guys made blocks, and some of them made 2 blocks and 3 blocks on the play. And for a team effort and rallying, I've always used that play as a teaching reel for my whole career. That was the best defensive play I have ever seen. Well, Roethlisberger's pass, first of all, he started that drive. We got a holding penalty, and he had, I think, 1st and 18 on about his own 15. Mm-hmm. And he was dealing with no time, and he had to get it all the way down in the end zone. But was the case with Ben most of the time, the more you needed something from him, he was going to give it to you. I had a lot of confidence that he would move that team down there, and he did. But now that play that he hit Holmes for the winning touchdown, I don't know how he got that ball in there, and I don't know how Holmes ever caught it. I've looked at it several times in reviewing the season. I've sit there and looked at that play 15 or 20 times right in a row, and he just Holmes barely got a hold of it with his fingers and Ben threw it. You know how the arm Roethlisberger had. That ball was humming, man, and he was way extended, way up in the air. He plucked that ball, and then he came down, and his feet literally were not over 2 inches in bounds. They had to run it back and forth a million times before they said it was a good catch. And well, sometimes things are just meant to go your way. But that was truly one of the great drives and one of the great offensive plays that I've ever seen. And when you look through that whole season, and it's in the book, it was kind of a Pittsburgh Steeler year that they was just the cards were dealt and stacked right and fell in our favor. And along with that, well, there was a game against San Diego early in the year. We won the game 11-10. Up until that time, there had never been a football game in the National Football League end with a score 11-10, and there still hasn't been. So there was enough of instances like that that I thought make a pretty interesting book. Or just sidebars like that going in there. But in the situation with the Arizona game, you always have hopes of shutting people out when you play, but the realistic approach, no one gets shut out in the NFL. The shutouts are as rare as, I don't know whether they happen once every 5 years even now in the NFL. But that's still what your game plan is, and they made a couple plays and Ben saved us. Let's put it that way.
Coach LeBeau, you obviously, members of that 2008 defense, had been around you for several years, so you knew them very well. I'm sure you knew how to press the hot buttons on several of them. Take a guy like James Ferrier, for example. Were there certain buttons that you knew that you could push with a guy like maybe James Ferrier, as experienced as he was at that time? Do you have any stories related to that? Or if not him, is there any, particular player that you knew that you could push a button on to get him ramped up a little bit?
I know I didn't have anything like that. I knew the guys, they knew me. They knew what I expected from them, and they knew what they could count on from me. I was going to be the same way every day. I was not going to deter from my approach to the game and the way we played and the way it was taught. I wasn't going to alter the way I called the games. They weren't going to get too many big surprises from me. and we depended and trusted each other. In the case of James Ferrier, he was our leader, our team captain. We had two guys that won the Most Valuable Player award at the Most Valuable Defensive Player for the National Football League. Harrison did it in the 2008 season, and Troy did it a couple of years later. And Troy's in the Hall of Fame, and Harrison, in my opinion, has got a good chance of getting in there before it's all said and done. Well, the third guy, those were the two most valuable players in the NFL defense that I coached. But the third guy that I think should have been, it was James Ferrier, and he was top in his. I'm trying to think. I think it was the 2005 year. I'm pretty sure it was where we won a championship again. But he finished second in the voting, whatever year that was, and I think he should have been the most valuable player. So he was a guy that you didn't have to push a button. He was always ready. He was our team captain, our leader. They were a family, and he was as big a part of that being the case. He took his role as a captain to heart. He was more vocal than some of our guys. Some of our great players were just focused and pretty quiet, easygoing guys, really. But James was going to speak out and lead, and he did the greatest job, as well a job as any of my captains that I've been around. And so I wasn't a button pusher. I tried to present the facts to the guys. I did it by video more than anything. If they had a play that I didn't like, I'd make them watch it for about 4 or 5 straight times, and I'd take my time explaining what went wrong. And they would be really anxious to get on to the next play because they were going to have to look at themselves not perform the way that we wanted them to do collectively. And that was one of their strengths. Each guy took it to their heart. Each man did not want to let their teammates down. They were a special group. That's really the outcropping of the title, legendary. After Ben threw that ball to San Antonio Holmes, Coach Tomlin got the defense around him on the sideline, and he said to them, I've been in the league a while and has been with some good defenses, some Super Bowl champion defenses. He said, and you guys have been a great defense all year, and you have played great football all year. If you make this last stop against this team today, you will become a legendary defense. So that's where the book title comes from. And that was that's probably as close to a pep talk as our guys got or needed. They were always ready to play, and I didn't worry about that. I trusted them.
When with that defense being such a legendary defense, we hear the term tendency breakers used, pretty regularly around the NFL. Were you much of a guy that was, as a defensive coordinator, that was worried, spent a lot of time on tendency breakers, or specifically maybe with that defense, was it like, hey, my guys know what to expect on every call that I make, and I'm not so much worried about tendency breakers?
Well, the truth of the matter is, I had a blackboard around my office, and on it I had every blitz that we had. We were a blitzing team. And I had every time that I had run each blitz in which game, and I constantly looked at that.
Okay.
The NFL, they're people, there's offensive coaches and defensive coaches. They're both getting ready for the game. And there's only so many times and so many games you can look at. And I would make sure that I saw every defense that they had seen in the last 4 games. And in all probability, my pressures were not going to be the pressures that they had seen. whatever they practiced that week, they weren't going to get in the game. That was something that, the only thing that I believe, and I still do believe, if you let an NFL quarterback know what defense you're in or who's coming where, if you're blitzing, they're going to pick up that blitz and they're going to burn you. They're going to make you pay for sure. So disguise was always a big part of what we were working on every week. And I was not going to repeat very much. I would look at the opponent's play caller, and if I hadn't seen him for a couple of years, I'd go back and look at all his games in the previous years just to see if I could get any tendency for myself. And if I was working that hard to pick up anything from him, then I was going to make sure that he didn't get any strong tendency from us. The thing that enabled us to do that more than most teams was the zone blitz concept, because you could change the pattern of the blitz, still pretty much call it the same thing, still blitz the same people, but with a completely different pattern coming from a different side of the formation. And once your guys had a couple of days of practicing that, they were going to execute it pretty good. Again, you said we'd been together for a while. That was another one of our strengths. We could make in-game changes pretty quickly and halftime adjustments quicker than most, because we all were in the same system, and we didn't jump around too much. We just didn't give the same appearance ever. We tried to always be tough to figure out. My theory there was the offense knows what the plays is, what the plays are. They know what the snap count is. They know whether it's a run or a pass. They know what hole the ball is going in. They know what formation they're going to end up in when they snap it. And the defense has to analyze all that and adjust to it. Well, we wanted to have some things that the offense had to adjust to also. Who's coming, where from, and who's lining up close that's going back, and who's lining up back that's going to come up and blitz. And our guys got pretty good at doing it, I would say.
Absolutely.
I would say so as well. Last question for you, Coach LeBeau. And again, the book is out right now. Legendary, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers defense, the zone blitz in my 6 decades in the NFL. Zooming out and focusing on that last part, I know you immediately made the transition from player with the Lions to coaching the Eagles in 1973. I don't think I've ever heard the story. How did you become the Eagles special teams coach in 1973? What kind of embarked you on your coaching career to begin with?
Well, when I was in college still, going back all the way back to Ohio State, I had 2 years in business accounting. My dad was an accountant, and my cousin, who was like a brother to me, was an accountant. I loved math, and I was very suited mentally for that. I just liked balancing things out and having it come out even at the end. I was going to be in accounting and work into comptroller if I could. But about halfway through my college career, I thought, man, I can't wear a necktie all my life. And so I went into physical education. And so I knew from that time on that I was going to be a coach. So I was lucky enough to play for 14 years in the National Football League, and I had a lot of coaches, and I watched and studied their various approach and teaching methods. And I thought, I was constantly saying, well, I like that. I think I would do it that way. Or I don't like that. I wouldn't do it that way. So I was going to be a coach. Well, I played football till I was 35 years old. And when I'd start looking for a job, they'd say, well, you don't have any coaching experience. I said, well, hell no. I've been playing the game. And I call that on-the-job training.
Yeah. Seriously.
Yeah. So the simple answer to your question is Mike McCormick had gotten the job as the head coach at Philadelphia. And Mike McCormick was a great all-pro offensive tackle for the Cleveland Browns. And I had been in training camp with him. It was my only exposure to him, really. But in those days, your training camps ran for 7 weeks. And so pretty much everybody on the team before you're out of there. And that got me an interview with him. And I, of course, interviewed for defensive backfield coach. That's what I had played for 14 years. But he said he would think about it. And when he called me back, he said, I want to hire you, but I want you, I don't have a defensive backfield position open. I have the special teams open. And he said, I'll understand if that's not what you want. I said, well, give me half a day here. And I just walked around the block and I said, well, you want to coach? And there's not too many people are giving you too much of the time of day. So there's no sense in not jumping into the swimming pool where they still got water in it. And that's when I started coaching in the coaching special teams.
Gotcha. An amazing career as a player, as a coach. Again, the book on sale right now. Legendary. The great Coach Dick LeBeau. Coach, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. The book is a must read. We're so happy that it's out, available. That story can be told, remembered forever. And just, again, very appreciative of your time, Coach.
I thank you very much for having me on, Miz. And go Steelers and go legendary Steeler defenses.
And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. And again, our special thanks to Coach LeBeau. Also, shout out to Scott Brown for making this book possible and helping us coordinate the interview with Coach LeBeau. Just always a treasure, always so grateful to have Coach LeBeau take the time to talk with us, Dave.
Absolutely. And please support and go out and buy the book. We have tweeted that stuff out several times already and have it linked in on the website. I think at some point here, we're going to have actually Scott Brown on to talk a little bit about the book. But man, how lucky are we to get to talk to Dick LeBeau second time on this podcast?
Absolutely. And the code still works, correct, Dave? Steal 30 to get 30% off the book Legendary. So if you're going to order, and you should, you can go to triumphbooks.com. It's also available in other places where anyone can buy books. Be able to put in the code Steal 30 to get 30% off. And certainly it'll be worth the read.
Absolutely.
All right, Dave, where to here? It's our 90 and 30 series. We are continuing on. Last time we did the Haywards and Alex Highsmith, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we were on Cole Holcomb, Dante Jackson, and Van Jefferson to start.
Yeah. What's the first name on the list there?
Cole Holcomb.
Yeah, Cole Holcomb. I think, obviously with him coming off of that injury from last season, the first line in the sand that we're going to look for him is he started training camp. Is he a guy that needs to open up training camp on the active PUP list, or is he able to get right out there and get going and get after it? And then from there, look, they went out and signed, obviously, Patrick Queen during the offseason. He's going to be your every down guy. You have a returning guy, veteran, and a Landon Roberts who really, I think played even better than what many people expected him to do last season. You've gone out there and drafted a guy like Peyton Wilson, who you think at some point is going to see some snaps on the field. It's just going to be, a wait and see with Cole Holcomb. Can he get on the field early on in training camp? And more importantly, can he be ready to go by the start of the regular season? And even if he is, what does that rotation and all look like? What kind of packages is he in on? So I mean, it's really a wait and see with the first line in the sand being right at the start of training camp.
Sure, and even assuming for a second he avoids the active PUP, how much is he practicing? Is he a full participant? Would feel like a stretch if he was out there 100% of the snaps for day one of training camp. He may be eased in, do individual work and skeleton work, and then move up to 7-on-7, and then full 11-on-11, and then maybe not even full contact at that point. So there's probably a lot of layers and steps to take, even if he is out there and eligible to practice. He had, as you said, a really good season last year, devastating knee injury. I just want to see how he looks whenever he does return from the injury. And then, as you said, just how does this inside linebacker rotation look? It's a good problem to have. They'll value their depth. They enjoyed the 3-man rotation they had the first half of last year when healthy with Holcomb, Alexander, and Roberts. I imagine they'll have similar rotations this year with Queen as your every down guy, and then Roberts and Peyton Wilson, and hopefully Holcomb filtering in some capacity. But there's still plenty of unknown with Holcomb, his role, and his overall play.
Yeah, and you will have a little bit of, I have a feeling about a week into, or obviously by the start of training camp. But I mean, if he has to start on active PUP, then the next line in the sand will be how because he cannot practice fully. He has to start training camp on active PUP to be eligible for reserve PUP come the start of the regular season there. So best case scenario is that he does not need to go on active PUP, because that means at that point that he cannot go on reserve PUP, and it means they are confident that where he is health-wise. You might see him take a more cautious role just to get him out there on active PUP at the start of training camp, let him run around for a couple of days and say, okay, you got the all clear. Then he comes off active PUP. The important thing to remember here is, though, that at the moment that he starts practicing, and if he was on active PUP to start training camp, once he comes off of active PUP, he cannot go back on PUP. So that's why they're probably likely, I would think, to be cautious with him in that area. Well, once again, best case scenario is he avoids all of that. He's ready to go. And then we start trying to figure out what the rotation looks like there moving forward. But we're not going to, we can sit here and speculate for another 30 minutes on him. But the fact of the matter is day one of training camp is going to answer the next question when it comes to him.
Sure, I agree. I know Omar Khan had referenced a doctor's appointment that Holcomb has sometime around this time of year, maybe a little bit later in July, that may determine his status to start the year. I think the NFL's relaxed IR rules make active PUP even a little less likely. Not that it matters too much if he does start there for the first day or two, but I mean, with the the designated to return rules, and at this point, even didn't they change the rules where you don't have to, like, you can just put a player on IR mid camp. We don't have to do this thing where you have to carry a veteran and do the waived injured thing, right? I think they've made some changes there too. So if God forbid, Holcomb wasn't ready, and he got hurt or re-aggravated something, he could go on IR and maybe be back a month into the season. So we'll see overall. But the prognosis seems to be a whole lot better than where it was in March, where the team really had no idea what his availability would be. If he played really again this year or anything like that. I know he's still wearing that black sleeve on his leg. I've seen a couple of photos of him since, for whatever that's worth, but seems to be walking around fine by the reporting of those at OTAs. Obviously, big difference between walking and playing football, but the rehab seems to be going as well as it could be for this terrible injury he suffered.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Dante Jackson. Obviously, he was acquired by the Steelers via trade with the Carolina Panthers that included Deontay Johnson going the other way. He immediately redid his contract, took a little bit of a pay cut within that. As on the back end of that, former second-round pick in 2018. This is a guy that you're bringing in with a purpose to hopefully start the season and be a complement opposite Joey Porter Jr. in 2024, and then see where things go from there. So the hope is that you've got your starter opposite Joey Porter Jr., at least for the 2024 season. Hopefully, better, hopefully you can use them obviously in both man and zone type situations. A limited sample size, at least from last year, was pretty decent with man, but it wasn't if you look at him statistically, I think over his career, kind of really mediocre, I think, at best in those situations there. Obviously the Panthers were looking, he was kind of out on the outside looking in kind of guy, as it was for Carolina, ahead of them trading him there. So there is a lot of questions that Dante Jackson has to answer about, can he still be an every down starter in this league?
What is your level of confidence in Jackson being the number 2? I think it certainly helps. The expectation is that Joey Porter Jr. should shadow opposing true number one receivers in a lot of situations. How well do you think Jackson can give what the team needs as that number two corner in the Steelers defense?
I mean, I think this is a classic Steelers mud on the wall situation. You'll taking a guy that they think that they know a lot of or knew a little bit about, dating back to the pre-draft process and kind of gauging his tape up to this point. Do I have high confidence that he's going to be able to be that guy without a lot of issues? No, I don't.
Do you think he'll be better than what Pittsburgh had last year of Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace, primarily the outside corners opposite Porter?
Look, I mean, Levi had his issues for sure, right? I mean, you even go back to Keller Witherspoon and all like that. Can he at least equal or be slightly better than what maybe those guys gave you? I think there's a possibility of that.
Yeah, I think he'll be about that level, hopefully a bit better. Wallace took a step back last year after I thought a good 2022. Peterson had a tough start to the year and then got better as the season progressed. I think Jackson will just be okay. I mean, that's probably a very safe assessment to make. There's going to be some negative reps. It's going to be some times where he gets burned, but he's got speed. He's athletic. There's enough physicality there. He's an experienced guy. It's good to have somebody experienced in that cornerback room because it's a really young room overall, especially knowing that Cam Sutton will not be around the team the first month of the regular season. So to have a veteran guy, there's going to be a benefit there. I did not think his play in Carolina was as bad as Panthers fans made it out to be last year. This guy always terrible. He's about to get cut. They're just trying to dump him. He wasn't great, but I thought he was okay. I mean, that's kind of my very fallback phrase on Dante Jackson. I think will be an okay corner.
Look, he does have 14 interceptions for his NFL career. Boy, if he could add 3 or 4 more to that total in 2024, that would be absolutely fantastic. The Steelers cornerbacks combined last season to register just 6 interceptions. So it'd be nice to see that whatever the 2024 group look like exceed that 6 interception mark.
It's still remarkable the number of takeaways Pittsburgh defense had last year, despite Minkah Fitzpatrick being responsible for 0 of them, mostly because of injury, in the cornerback room having only 6 interceptions to still have, 27 takeaways. Kind of hard to believe.
Mm-hmm. So, look, I mean, I think you go into this obviously hoping for the best, that maybe you've solved that for this year and that you get the 17 games out of him. And, he complements a player in Porter who's likely to move around a lot. And obviously with Minkah probably going to be tied more to the back end and, hopefully be able to provide a little bit more help to Jackson's side, those kind of things. So, look, was it an awful move on their part? No. But within that, you do have a player that, is kind of a middling player in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I still think it was a bad trade in terms of what they gave up and what they got from a player standpoint. There's a lot of layers in terms of salary and cultural fit and all those things we talk about with Deontay Johnson and Dante Jackson. As long as Jackson doesn't get burned often and can tackle in space decently well, I can live with probably whatever other play he offers this year, as long as he can do those 2 things.
Right. And once again, I mean, if he can put 3 or 4 interceptions on the board, that would be huge.
For sure. All right, Dave, Van Jefferson. Tell us about Van Jefferson.
Yeah, man, I harken back to the pre-draft process with him, and I think you were you were higher than I was on him coming out. Obviously, things did not work out with the Rams. Went on mid-season last year to the Falcons, where he's obviously has familiarity with what Arthur Smith's trying to do at this point. That will be a plus in and of itself, just from a teaching aspect, along with the rest of the Falcons that have joined this team. In total last season, he had 20 receptions, 209 yards, and no touchdowns on 43 total targets. His long reception was 46 yards. He did register 3 drops last season. He played a hair over 600 offensive snaps, with 356 of those coming with the Falcons. He did log a decent amount of playing time on offense in 2023, but he did not see the field on special teams. Overall, he's part of this group that the Steelers went out and added these veteran guys like Quez Watkins, a lot of Scotty Millers, a lot of minimum salary guys to see which one of those guys could poke their head out and maybe give you something. As far as experience and quality of the guys, and then combined with probably bringing a rookie along in Roman Wilson, a little bit maybe slow at the start of the season. Is he maybe odds on the kind of the favorite to see some playing time, the most playing time, maybe opposite George Pickens early on in the season? I think that's plausible if he sticks.
I think so too. In my deconstructing the roster series, where I was trying to assign percentages and odds of making the 53, I gave Jefferson the second best odds of kind of the core four competing. Calvin Austin was number one, Jefferson, and then Quez Watkins and Scotty Miller. I think he's got the slight edge. He's got some size, experience, obviously knows the Arthur Smith offense, traded over from the Rams midway through last year. The tape has fallen off last year. It was all underneath. It was all short area type stuff. Can this guy show some burst, make some plays after the catch? Maybe he can. He had shown promise early in his career with the Rams, with better quarterback play, a better situation overall. So, it's still there potentially, but can this guy be more than just kind of this big-bodied, almost Allen Robinson type? Hopefully he can. Pittsburgh needs someone to be able to, fulfill that role.
Yeah, they need a physical guy, especially in some of these situations where you expect them to run the football. I think he can handle that aspect of it there. I think my final sentence here on him was, if he does stick to this roster this summer, I think 20 to 25 receptions in 2024 seems like the ceiling for him.
Probably if he's catching more, might be concerned, because do they go out there and find somebody that hopefully can offer more? So we'll see. I mean, I just take all the receivers, all the four I mentioned, just kind of throw them in the camp and let the best men win. I think it's two guys coming away from those two spots for those four names. I think it's probably how this receiver room shakes up.
I mean, he almost has to be making here's the worry. The special teams ability with him, if he doesn't secure like the number 2 or number 3 spot out of camp. If he's like your fourth best, can you do better than him because of the fact that he's not really known as a special teams asset?
That's fair, although I think a lot of that applies to Scotty Miller and Quez Watkins. Calvin Austin can offer something on punt returns, maybe some kick returns too. We'll see who they use opposite Cordarrelle Patterson. But none of those guys are the coverage type of guys. Maybe someone gets a shot there. They probably will, but there's no resume on that. And that's where Des Fitzpatrick can kind of sneak in and capture a number 5 spot. But yeah, whoever loses the receiver aspect of it, it's going to be in trouble, because the special teams aspect is not going to be a great fallback plan, except for maybe Austin.
From where you sit right now, are you writing his name down in pen on the 53?
In pen, certainly not. It's a very light pencil with an eraser nearby.
I agree.
All right, Jeray Jenkins, sticking with the receivers. He was signed a couple weeks ago. I think he would be bounced on and off the roster. If memory serves, you can tell me better, Dave. But obviously, uphill climb to even just get reps and opportunities in training camp.
Yeah, he wound up sustaining a foot injury last summer that resulted in him being waived injured with a settlement by the Jaguars, and that injury reportedly required surgery for him, which I found digging deeper into his history there. And he ultimately did not surface on an NFL practice squad last season. Put up some decent numbers, I think, at LSU. Let's see, 89 receptions for nearly 1,400 yards and 14 touchdowns. Last year during the preseason, he had 2 receptions for 32 yards, only played 37 offensive snaps for the Jaguars last preseason before getting injured. His late arrival to the Steelers offseason roster will probably put him behind the 8 ball a little bit once training camp gets underway. We just mentioned the Steelers have several other more experienced wide receivers on the roster who's, obviously going to be a legitimate competition for Jenkins. Jenkins, not a long speed guy in my notes here. Also had 9 drops in college. It's a little bit concerning. For Jenkins merely to stay on the offseason roster throughout, preseason, I think would be a huge accomplishment for him in and of itself. So I view him as a guy that his best shot of sticking in Pittsburgh would likely be as a practice squad player after the preseason ends here.
Agreed. He got signed as the receiver replacement once Denzel Mims was waived and caught on in Jacksonville, funny enough. So they're kind of trading places there. The reps are just hard to come by. I mean, I remember Dan Chisena last year, barely getting 3-4 snaps of practice, and you trying to make the most of those chances, and they're just not really there. And as you said, injury happens, another position group. A guy like Jenkins could be one of those guys who just kind of gets caught up in the numbers crunch of it all. So we'll see. I mean, get eyes on him, of course, like everybody else, but tough path for Dre Jenkins.
He's a guy a week into training camp through no fault of his own. Maybe another line has at another position has a few injuries that, he ends up going off the roster and we hardly even knew you.
Sure. It's a reality that happens every camp all around the league.
All right, Kyron Johnson's next on the list here. We had a little bit of a conversation about him. We volunteered it because people were asking about, couple other outside linebackers on the roster, and David Perales and Jeremiah Moon. And I kind of threw the name out there. Hey, we'll talk about Kyron Johnson in addition to those two guys, merely for the fact that I think Kyron has kind of become, or is, at least it was in my mind. So the good thing about this 90 and 30 is it forces me to remember some things about some players here. And you roll back to last season. This is a guy that was on the active game day roster quite a bit last season. A lot of people might not remember that. He played in 7 games for the Steelers last season. Of one of those contests was a wild card game. He only logged 1 defensive snap in total, but he did register 116 special team snaps. Now, obviously, the TJ Watt injury played into that, and they needed some special teams bodies along the way. But I think it's just worth noting in and of itself that this team thought enough of him to stay active in putting him on the inactive roster, even though it was for special teams needs only, really. And when you look at the state, obviously you don't have Marcus Golden on this roster anymore, and you're expecting your top 3 outside linebackers to be Watt, Highsmith, and Nick Herbig. It comes into question of who's going to be that number 4. A lot of buzz around Jeremiah Moon, and with good reason. Because of that, he's built differently. He has more experience rushing the passer. He can also play on special teams. But, I think Kyron he's been kind of shoved to the side, and I think special attention just needs to be paid to him, mainly because the team thought enough of him from a special team standpoint. So once you get into assuming he sticks into the preseason, need to watch his play on defense, how he's used there. Is he able to offer you anything whatsoever there? And more importantly, is he able to give you some splash plays on special teams? Because if he's able to do that, he's going to increase his odds significantly on sticking on this roster. But overall, it's hard not to put Jeremiah Moon ahead of him, because Moon also gives you that special teams splash, in addition to probably being a better player top to bottom if you had to put him out there on defense. But all I'm trying to say here is just don't force him off the roster immediately at the start of camp.
I agree with the assessment. I think Moon's ahead, but you should forget about Johnson, and I'm glad we're talking about him now. I mentioned this on the live stream Monday, that the issue with him that I saw was just he's so small, and typically those smaller edge guys don't work in Pittsburgh. I know Herbig's been an exception, but I think even Herbig is bigger and more built than what Kyron Johnson is. So that's going to be the tough part with him, with Moon being the, I think, more interesting edge guy, stronger, bigger, much longer, more physically imposing, with the special teams background too that Johnson also possesses. Practice squad can't be ruled out. And if a guy gets hurt, he get called up, and that's what basically happened to him last year. So don't want to forget about him. And you're right, he's been totally just unrecognized, untalked about throughout this offseason process. But I still give Boone, I think, a healthy edge going into camp.
I do as well, too. All right, next one on the list. Not a lot to really talk about there. Cameron Johnston, the new punter. The Steelers had to go in a different direction this offseason because of the inconsistency that they've had for the last several years with Presley Harvin III. They went out and did that with the signing of Cameron Johnston to a 3-year, $9 million unrestricted free agent contract. And now you expect him to be the best punter that the Steelers have had in several years now. And what he had for his NFL career to date, punting average of 47.3 yards with a net average of 43.5 yards. He's also only had one punt block during his career. He is now a little bit older at 32 years of age, but, age and punters really, as long as you're still able to get the job done, which it seemed like he was able to do last season. He'll obviously be the holder for Chris Boswell, but I would imagine they'll work out whatever kinks there might be with that throughout training camp and all. So this is the guy that's expected to be the guy for you now.
And I think he will be. I was really excited about this signing, Dave, when it happened very early in free agency. I thought it was a must to get a veteran as opposed to trying to go find a young guy, a rookie, draft somebody. I just want to get that proven leg, and Johnston has been that. And yeah, he's coming from Houston, and the question is, how can he kick in a colder climate? And he's from Australia too, one of those Aussie punters, but he went to Ohio State, kicked in Philadelphia, had success to begin his NFL career. So winter conditions, cold weather, nothing new to him overall. Does have a bit of that rugby flair to his style. Hang time has never been his strong suit, but he's got a big leg. It's been ultra productive, and I think, it's a low bar, but could and should have the best single season punting production in Steelers history. If he averages 47.1 yards of gross average, he'll break the record. And I think he's more than capable of doing that.
Consistency is the word we use a lot, or have used a lot the last several years when it comes to the Steelers punting situation.
Or lack thereof.
Yeah. We need to see consistency out of the punter. Look, specific, backed up in your own end. You need a guy that you can roll out there. God forbid you're punting out of your own end zone. That doesn't get off the 28-yard punt. You need someone that can make a difference and flip the field, because that can make a difference in some games.
Oh yeah, and to me, it's your first line of defense. Your punter's your first player playing defense out there. Help set field position, and if he can do his job with the strength of Pittsburgh's actual defense, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick, TJ Watt, etc., should be in good shape. So this, I think, will be a good signing. I certainly hope it'll be a worthwhile signing.
All right. Do we want to do 3 more here?
We're running a bit long today. We'll
table that.
Yeah, we'll table it. We'll talk with Coach LeBeau, and we'll do 3 more for the Friday show.
All right. Shall we check in on the email machine?
Yep. Let's get to some reader emails and close out today's show.
Don't know how much we have in here. Let's see. Richard Jameson writes in, Camp Darling. He says, with the Steelers about to start camp, who is your prediction for Camp Darling, the unheralded guy who gathers a lot of attention, even if he doesn't make the roster? At this point, right now, there's a lot of talk about Beanie Bishop, right? Not that this year the Steelers had a large undrafted free agent class, but of those 5 originally signed, I guess what I'm getting at is, it too much of a give me to point to him?
I mean, he probably still kind of qualifies, but yeah, he wouldn't be the traditional true unknown. Like last year's Camp Darlings, I would consider them to be Dylan Cook, and for the first half of camp, Kenny Robinson, and probably half people don't remember who Kenny Robinson was anymore. Bishop might be a little too under the microscope, on radar, to really truly feel like a Camp Darling.
All right. I guess Dejuan Edwards would be a dart throw. But I like a lot of his tape. I really do. He is a little undersized, but I mean, he very well could have the type of preseason, and depending on how the roster's constructed, how many wide receivers and tight ends are kept, could make a little noise there. Let me see if I can go a little bit deeper than that.
We talked up Marquez Callaway a little bit with the talent he's shown in the past in New Orleans. It's a messy receiver battle, but could he beat up on a couple of young corners in camp? I could see that.
Yeah, I could see that as well there too.
Jack Coletto, I think he's going to wear a lot of hats, and there'll be a fullback talk in Pittsburgh. Maybe there's something there with him.
Yeah, and you kind of talked a little bit about the undrafted linebacker out of Michigan State too. Maybe could weasel his way on, maybe in a backup special teams role. Who was that? Widman?
Yeah, Jacoby Widman. Maybe he could challenge Mark Robinson. I don't want to discount that. That's a guy that I think had some talent coming out of Michigan State. I think your Edwards poll is a really good one. I think he'll make some fun plays in camp.
Is it fair to give a shout out to Rodney Williams? I just think because, he was kind of my call last year just to some degree. I didn't come out and say, this is going to be your camp darling or anything, but come cut down time, I said, don't forget, about him ultimately. And he ended up making his way back to the roster.
That's a good call.
I think we've hit on a lot of the names there though, to kind of watch. I guess he wants to pin us down on one guy each.
Yeah, I think Edwards is as good a name as any to suggest. Maybe I'll say Callaway, but usually that camp darling is that guy that you wouldn't have guessed, you wouldn't even talked about. So that's kind of how the definition works, but there's always somebody.
Right. Okay, let's see if we can move forward here from that email and go to I love your level-headed. Let's see, this from Jarrett Marcus. He says, I love your level-headed fan approach to news and analysis, and that your disagreements become productive discussions. To get to it, how attractive are the Steelers to any of the named wide receivers that have been mentioned this offseason? Given the system, the personality they'd be splitting targets with, the level of competition, the weather, I don't see how any of those receivers would be increasing their short-term stats or long-term pay by coming to the Steelers, but I'm probably missing something. I normally am. Any insight would be appreciated. Thank you for your team and all the hard work and dedication, Jarrett. He's looking at it as wanting our thoughts on how attractive the Steelers would be to any of these bigger name guys, like I guess Debo, Ayuk, Cortland Sutton, and all like that. First and foremost, it's the money.
Yes.
That would probably be attractive first and foremost. Now, obviously, Debo's already on a healthy contract overall. So, and once again, I can't emphasize enough, if they were to deal for one of these guys, they're dealing for them, so it's not like the receiver has a say in the situation. Second, you're probably not going to give a new contract, I wouldn't think, to a guy like Debo Samuel and to some degree Cortland Sutton. I would expect if you did acquire Cortland Sutton somehow during a trade, or even a DK Metcalf, you're going to leave those deals as is. The only guy I think of these quote unquote significant named wide receivers that would come in that would get a new contract would be Brandon Ayuk. And then we're back into the discussion of, are you going to really turn around and pay that guy, make that guy the highest paid player on the roster, even more so than a guy like TJ Watt? That's the hardest part of the whole discussion within that. So I look at it less of, given the system and the player being worried about how he'd fit in and the amount of production he could get, to me, it doesn't even go into any of that. It's more about, show me the money.
Yep, 100%. You pay Ayuk what he wants. Let's call it $30 million per year. He'll be happy. That's what he's looking for. And I think even beyond that, yeah, I get, you're in a run-heavy offense. Pickens will get some targets. But listen, you're in Pittsburgh. You're for Mike Tomlin. You're going to be competitive. You're going to be in the mix in the playoff hunt. That's usually enough to satisfy most players from a baseline selling them to join your team standpoint. Will they be super happy once they get here? Who the heck knows? But I think Pittsburgh is still viewed upon favorably by most players. So you have that. If the money's right, it makes Pittsburgh an attractive enough landing spot.
Agreed. All right. Bryce writes in, this will be the last one we do. While we all would love to see a move made to bring in a more solid number 2 wide receiver, is it possible that in the Steelers' mind, they are putting more emphasis on Arthur Smith being able to scheme up the current group with the tight ends included and basically create their own dynamic number 2 option? I mean, at this point, I mean, I have given up. I think that there will be still at this point another wide receiver thrown into this group, albeit not as sexy as any of the 4 names that have been talked about, in the Ayuks, the Deebo Samuels, the Cortland Suttons, the Brandon Ayuk, who did I miss? DK Metcalf. Those 4 guys are, at this point, I'd be a bit surprised if any of that happens. Now, could you see, who's Treylon Burks, some of these
Alec Pierce.
Yeah, Alec Pierce. Could you see a guy like that maybe end up on it? I think there's a decent chance of that happening. Regardless, yeah, I think more of the emphasis is going to be on, mixing and matching guys to fit certain down distances, packages of these, either the guys already under contract or maybe with that extra guy brought in to kind of work around to indeed maybe kind of create their own kind of committee number 2 opposite Pickens.
Yeah, I mean, the original question was, what will Arthur Smith be brought in to elevate the scheme more than focusing on talent?
Is it possible that in the Steelers' mind, they are putting more emphasis on Arthur Smith being able to scheme up the current group with the tight ends included and basically create their own dynamic number 2 option? In other words, Pat Freiermuth, because look, as things sit right now, it's hard to imagine Pat Freiermuth not being the second leading receiving option on this team behind George Pickens, right?
Agreed.
I mean, and really the conversation ends right there.
Unless a running back gets involved, because Jaylen Warren did catch 61 receptions and almost led the team in receptions last year.
Right. But I mean, assuming they don't go out, even if they went out and got a Burks or something like that at this point, something seems like it would have had to gone wrong if Pat Freiermuth's not the second leading receiver on this team.
Sure, if they get one of those lower tier options and not an Ayuk or Sutton, then you'd probably still bet on Freiermuth being the number 2 receiver. I think they're doing both. I think they still want to search to add talent. I think Pittsburgh has almost not explicitly said, but kind of implicitly said they're still looking, and all the reporting out there indicates that. I think they will. I think I'm with you, Dave. I think they will add a receiver ahead of week 1, somebody not on this current roster. But you can also need to have your scheme elevate the talent. Matt Canada did not do anything schematically to elevate talent. I would argue that Randy Fichtner, while a better OC than Matt Canada, didn't do much to elevate the talent. Who's the last OC that's really maximized the potential of the group? Todd Haley, probably. So Smith's a guy that was brought in to partially do that. So I don't think it's either or. I think it's both and. I think you're always looking for talent and then looking for ways to maximize that with scheme.
Plus, you don't spend a 3rd-round draft pick on Roman Wilson just to have him sit the whole season. He might not play as much as people want him to play early on in the season, but you go out and draft a guy with the intentions of getting him involved in the offense as his rookie season progresses.
You do, but sometimes those 3rd-round picks don't do a whole lot. James Washington's rookie year, he was a 2nd-round guy. It was pretty quiet. I mean, you go way back. I'm going back to like Willie Reed and those guys. And Wilson has some rawness to his game. So he'll certainly play. He'll definitely get his touches, and hopefully he plays well and progresses. But I really don't know what kind of season production-wise Roman Wilson's going to have.
But what I'm getting at is he'll be part of that mix.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He'll certainly get reps and opportunities. If he does well in camp, then they may go with him if they can't find somebody out of the gate.
Right. So, I guess to answer the question, I mean, we expect Arthur Smith to try to scheme up with the current group, plus maybe a non-sexier addition potentially happening. But all told, from where we sit right now, at least for me, I'm expecting Pat Fryermuth to be heavily involved in the passing game.
Sure, me as well. A healthy Pat Fryermuth with hopefully a paid Pat Fryermuth. A lot of reasons to get that guy the football.
All right. I think we got through a set of questions there, and I think we're about ready to close out this Tuesday afternoon show.
Yeah, so we'll come back on Friday, see what the news cycle brings us. Then again, check out the book Legendary Dick LeBeau, the 2008 Pittsburgh Steelers Defense, the Zone Blitz in My 6 Decades in the NFL. Shout out to our Scott Brown for all his work with the book and all that he's done for us. And use the code STEEL30 to get the book 30% off.
Absolutely. All right. In the meantime, you can follow me on Steeler or on Twitter /X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate to the cause, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the donate button, upright navigational bar. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com. Hit the ad-free button. Follow the directions that way. So until Friday, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.